The government moves to repeal the controversial Three Strikes Law. Justice Minister Andrew Little has a short time ago set out a likely time frame for how the repeal will proceed.
Look, I couldn't give a timetable on it. When legislation is introduced, it's normally kind of a 6-month process from beginning to end, so it's just a question of when it's introduced. I would say about Three Strikes too. There's not much that Three Strikes does that can't be done with existing sentencing legislation. It is already a principle that if you committed the same offence again or again and again, then you have an escalating level of sentence. And then, depending on the nature of it and the nature of you as an offender, you will have conditions attached to your sentence. So everything is already there. Three strikes was only ever a gimmick.
Are you going to get the support of Winston Peters? After all, Three Strikes was initially his idea in the 1990s.
Look, I think Winston has an interesting point that he puts to me. He says that he's sick and tired of innocent New Zealanders getting mugged on the streets and then getting mugged as taxpayers a second time. So I think New Zealand First members are up for a constructive debate about effective criminal justice reform, and that's where we're going.
But you'll need their support. You'll need their support if Three Strikes is going to go.
Yeah, and so this goes to Cabinet in roughly 10 days' time, and Cabinet will make its decision about whether to introduce legislation into Parliament.
Andrew Little speaking to reporters at Parliament a short time ago. But the man who in the late 90s drove a citizens-initiated referendum in which 92% of the 2 million votes cast called for tougher sentences for serious violent offenders says Three Strikes does have a place. Norm Withers' elderly mother was severely beaten with a jack handle while looking after Norm's shop. The law and order petition he started gained so many signatures that a referendum was held in 1999 without overwhelming public support, 92%. And he told me a short time ago he still doesn't think politicians and the courts have it right.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm sort of struggling to come to terms with it because I hear Mr Little with these plans and reducing prison numbers, etc., 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 and it's not going to work. And I mean, the Three Strikes, frankly, it was long overdue. It gave judges opportunities to impose the correct penalties therein. I know that there hasn't been that many people that have gone past the second strike, and the point of the matter is, I don't know if people realise, but there's up to about 40 qualifying offences, so it's not just one item or one factor that would bring about consideration for a further strike. There's a number of offences that fall into this category. And I feel a lot of this is in the hands of the judges, and in fact, going back in time, largely I thought we had, John, reasonably sensible sentences in terms of longevity, but often they weren't dished out in that vein. I mean, I know there was a time when, for example, home invasion gave the judges the power to give another 5 years on top of the maximum penalty for the crime, but I never saw it invoked very often. I've been over the years, John, very, very uptight about parole and parole entitlement. Now, back in 2002, I remember dealing with Mr Phil Goff, and he was kind to ring me and say that murder has become now parolable after 17 years. And I said, well, that's an improvement. It used to be 10. I never condoned a guy that stole a dozen cans from the bottle store, but the people that violate people such as my dear mum by a person that had 56 criminal convictions finally went to jail for that. Again, went to jail and then came out and offended again in the same vein. I've got no consideration with those sort of people.
The thing is, I guess, if you look back to your referendum in 1999 and the overwhelming public support for it, there was a sense that the politicians, and you referred to Phil Goff, who was in government after your referendum, there was a sense the politicians and the courts listened. Do you think they did?
To be very fair, yes, I do.
Right, and the sentences got longer. So do we need three strikes? We have a prison population at over 10,000, its highest level ever. It's risen 350% in the past 30 years. Do we need three strikes, or are the courts already doing the job you would have them do?
The courts are not doing the job, but that's my point. The facility is there for the judges to use a maximum sentence, but they don't. Often they don't. And how would it be if I said I think to my knowledge, approximately 20 murders in the last 5 or 6 years have been committed by people on parole. Well, one doesn't have to be a road scholar to work out that that's 20 poor people that have lost their lives, and look at the affected families. And part of the referendum, John, was about consideration for victims. Now, if you go to the Sentencing Act in 2002, item 27 calls upon offender being requesting the court to hear in person from the whānau, the community, the family, about the cultural background of the offender, etc., etc., etc. But nowhere does it say, let's have the voice of the victim. The victims are always the last considered, and they're the ones that suffer the most. I've heard, we know the stories about toys tossed out of the cot, this, that and the other, but I used to say, John, and I mean it, way back then, we're not living in Zanzibar, we're living in New Zealand. We all know right from wrong, and if you choose to go down that path, there's consequences. Sadly, the consequences aren't high enough.
Norm Withers talking to us a short time ago.